The Meridian Combat Academy existed because someone in the galactic bureaucracy had decided that elite warriors from different species should learn to kill things together more efficiently. It was, by most reasonable standards, a spectacular monument to interspecies cooperation through violence. The architects had built it into an asteroid, which seemed appropriate given that most of the students resembled various forms of animated geology with homicidal tendencies. Cadet Epsilon 7, your reaction time during the neural spike drill was 17% below acceptable parameters, Instructor Vex announced to the human standing at the back of Formation Bay Delta. The Crin's crystalline voice carried that particular tone, reserved for addressing disappointing investments. Perhaps you would benefit from observing today's demonstrations rather than participating. Over 97% of viewers here are watching without subscribing. Don't be one of them. Hit that subscribe button right now and join the journey. Every click helps us grow stronger, and you'll never miss the next epic story. The human, they called her Epsilon 7, because apparently numbered designations were easier for the instructor's translation matrices, nodded once and stepped aside. Around her, 24 of the galaxy's most efficient organic killing machines prepared for another day of learning creative destruction. Pathetic, rumbled Gorith, a Vorthak whose carapace gleamed like polished obsidian. His mandibles clicked in what passed for amusement among his kind. Why do the Academy overseers even waste resources on that species? They break if you look at them too hard. Inefficient resource allocation, agreed Nexus Prime, whose helix biomechanical frame hummed with barely contained energy. My preliminary scans indicate bone density 30% below combat viability. Muscle response time suggests evolutionary adaptation for fleeing rather than fighting. Epsilon 7 continued adjusting her gear with methodical precision, apparently deaf to the commentary. This only encouraged her critics. Perhaps they serve some support function, offered Shard, a Crin whose razor-edged limbs could slice through titanium composite armor. Logistics coordination? Medical assistance? Certainly nothing requiring actual combat capability. Instructor Vex's attention shifted to the formation's apex specimens. The Vorthak, Crin, and Helix represented the three most successful warrior cultures in known space. Their species had conquered star systems through superior combat evolution. The Vorthak possessed exoskeletons that could deflect plasma bursts and reflexes that registered movement in microseconds. The Crin had evolved living crystal matrices that could reshape their limbs into any weapon configuration while maintaining perfect structural integrity. The Helix had transcended biological limitations entirely, grafting mechanical enhancements that made them walking arsenals. Then there were the humans, software slow, fragile, confusing. Today's exercise involves adaptive combat scenarios, Vex continued, his crystalline form shifting to project tactical displays. Each cadet will face randomized threats requiring immediate strategic adjustment. The Academy monitors your performance for final placement within elite combat units. Gorith stretched his primary arms, servos whining as his carapace plates shifted. Finally, these simulations grow tedious without proper challenge. Agreed, Nexus Prime's optical array focused on the simulation pods. My combat protocols require adequate stress testing. Perhaps the instructors will provide opponents worthy of full engagement. Epsilon 7 quietly checked her equipment harness one final time. Unlike her classmates, she carried no visible weapons, no armor plating, no obvious technological enhancements. Just standard-issue training gear and what appeared to be a data pad covered in handwritten notes. What is that primitive recording device? Shard's voice carried genuine curiosity. Among the Crin, information storage occurred through direct crystal matrix encoding. The concept of physical notation seemed quaint, Looks like scribbled markings, Goreth observed. Perhaps their species lacks proper data integration capabilities. No, Nexus Prime corrected after a more detailed scan. The markings follow systematic patterns, movement vectors, timing sequences, physiological response charts. She appears to be cataloging combat data manually. The three apex predators exchanged what passed for confused glances among their respective species. Manual data collection seemed inefficient to the point of absurdity. Cadet Goreth, you will demonstrate first, Vex announced. Simulation parameters, hostile environment, multiple threat vectors, victory condition requires elimination of all targets within optimal time constraints. Goreth entered the simulation pod with predatory confidence. Through the observation screens, the other cadets watched him tear through holographic enemies with brutal efficiency. His exoskeleton deflected energy weapons, while his razor-sharp limbs dismembered anything within reach. The simulation ended in 43 seconds, with complete target elimination. Acceptable performance, Vex noted. Cadet Nexus Prime, proceed. The Helix warrior approached the simulation with mechanical precision. His performance was even more impressive. Integrated weapon systems eliminated threats at range, while enhanced mobility allowed him to control battlefield positioning perfectly. Victory in 37 seconds. Superior optimization, Vex approved. Cadet Shard, your demonstration. The Kryn's approach differed entirely. Instead of brute force or technological superiority, Shard reshaped his crystalline matrix to match each threat perfectly. Against energy weapons, he became reflective surfaces. Against physical attacks, he transformed into cutting edges. Adaptive perfection in 31 seconds. Outstanding tactical flexibility, Vex concluded. The simulation protocols will be adjusted upward for your final assessments. During each demonstration, Epsilon 7 had watched, intently, occasionally making notes on her primitive data pad. Her concentration seemed absolute, as if she were studying rather than merely observing. Cadet Epsilon 7, Vex's voice carried resignation. You may attempt the basic simulation. Parameters will be adjusted downward to accommodate your species' limitations. She entered the pod without comment. The other cadets gathered around the observation screens, expecting either immediate failure or at best a severely prolonged struggle against simplified threats. What they witnessed instead defied easy categorization. Epsilon 7 moved through the simulation like liquid mercury flowing around obstacles. She didn't fight the holographic enemies so much as dance between their attacks, never quite where they expected, never engaging on their terms. An energy blast intended to vaporize her instead struck another target she had somehow maneuvered into position. A charging predator found itself redirected into a wall through what appeared to be a casual sidestep that became a guiding push. The simulation ended in 28 seconds. Complete target elimination through what could only be described as orchestrated chaos. Silence filled Formation Bay Delta. Instructor Vex, Nexus Prime finally vocalized, my combat analysis protocols cannot categorize the tactical approach we just observed. Agreed, Shard added. The movement patterns suggest no known combat doctrine, yet the efficiency rating exceeds our own performance metrics. Goreth's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of agitation among his kind. That was not fighting. That was something else. Epsilon 7 emerged from the simulation pod, quietly noting something else on her data pad. She rejoined the formation as if nothing unusual had occurred. Vex's crystalline matrix flickered through several color configurations, the Kryn equivalent of deep confusion. Cadet Epsilon 7, explain your tactical approach. She looked up from her notes. I watched what worked for everyone else, then adapted the principles to different applications. That is impossible, Nexus Prime stated flatly. Combat effectiveness requires species-specific evolutionary advantages. You lack the necessary biological or technological prerequisites." "Maybe," she replied, with what might have been the faintest smile. "Or maybe you're all so focused on your advantages that you never noticed what mine might be." Before anyone could respond to this cryptic statement, the Academy's general announcement system activated. "All combat cadets report to main assembly. The gauntlet assessment period begins in 72 hours. Final rankings will determine placement within elite units. Performance standards expect demonstration of maximum capability against peer-level opposition." As the formation dispersed, conversations erupted among the apex predators. Theories were exchanged, hypotheses debated, concerns expressed. The human who had just outperformed the galaxy's finest warriors walked quietly toward the dormitory sections, still making notes on her primitive datapad. She had 72 hours to prepare for the gauntlet, the Academy's ultimate test where cadets faced each other in direct combat elimination. The instructors expected it would quickly sort the truly elite from the merely competent. They had no idea how correct that assumption would prove to be. The Academy's central archive existed in a state of perpetual digital twilight, where holographic data streams cascaded through the air like luminous waterfalls. Most cadets avoided the place. Why research when your claws could solve problems more directly? But Epsilon 7 had claimed a corner table and surrounded herself with tactical recordings from every major conflict in the past 3 centuries. Still attempting to compensate for biological inadequacy through theoretical study? Instructor Krell materialized beside her workstation, his Vorthak frame casting jagged shadows across the data displays. Unlike Vex, Krell specialized in psychological warfare and breaking weak candidates before they embarrassed the Academy during real missions. "Something like that," she replied, manipulating a 3-dimensional replay of a Kryn battalion demolishing a fortified position. The recording showed how Shard species coordinated their crystal matrix reshaping to create synchronized weapons formations. Fascinating approach. Most doomed cadets spend their final hours in recreational activities or sending farewell messages to their spawning colonies. Krell's mandibles spread in what might charitably be called a grin. "You persist in this academic charade." She rotated the tactical display, examining the Kryn advance from multiple angles. "Academic, right. The other instructors fined your simulation performance yesterday." "Puzzling," Krell continued, settling into a nearby chair that groaned under his armored weight. "Care to illuminate us regarding your methodology? Would you believe I got lucky? No. Then I probably shouldn't explain it." Across the archive, a cluster of senior cadets had gathered around a different workstation, their voices carrying despite attempts at discretion. 19-1 odds, Nexus Prime was calculating aloud. The betting pool among combat instructors heavily favors elimination within the first preliminary round. "Conservative estimate," agreed Talon, another Vorthak whose specialty involved disemboweling opponents with surgical precision. "I predict she withdraws before facing actual combat. Self-preservation instinct overrides whatever delusion drove that simulation anomaly." Shard projected a holographic analysis chart that hung in the air between them. "Probability matrices confirm rapid elimination. Her species lacks redundant organ systems, reinforced skeletal structure, or enhanced reflexes. First significant impact will likely prove fatal. Unless," Goreth interjected thoughtfully, "yesterday's performance indicates capabilities we have not properly assessed." "Impossible!" Nexus Prime's optical array flickered through diagnostic sequences. "My sensors detected no concealed technology, no genetic modifications, no combat pharmaceuticals, standard human physiology with minor variations." "Then explain her simulation results." "Statistical anomaly. simulation randomization protocols occasionally produce scenarios favoring unconventional approaches over direct confrontation. Epsilon 7 continued studying her tactical displays, but her attention had shifted to the conversation occurring 20 meters away. Interesting how apex predators assumed their enhanced senses made them naturally superior at stealth. "Instructor Krell," she said quietly, "what would you consider the primary weakness of Vorthak combat doctrine?" The question caught him off guard. Instructors were accustomed to answering tactical queries, but students rarely asked about their species' vulnerabilities. "We possess no significant tactical weaknesses. Millennia of evolutionary refinement have eliminated such deficiencies." Hypothetically, though. Krell's compound eyes focused on her with sudden intensity. Hypothetically, overconfidence in superior physical capabilities might occasionally compromise strategic flexibility. Why do you ask? "Just curious about theoretical scenarios." She dismissed the Kryn tactical recording and pulled up documentation of Helix combat operations. The biomechanical warriors fought with devastating precision, but their integrated systems followed predictable optimization patterns. Every decision tree led toward maximum efficiency through technological superiority. Epsilon 7. A new voice interrupted her research. Chief Instructor Mordak approached their table, his presence commanding immediate attention. Among the Helix hierarchy, he represented absolute combat authority, a walking weapons platform that had survived conflicts across half the galaxy. "Sir, the preliminary trials begin tomorrow. Standard protocol requires final equipment inspection and tactical briefing for all participants." His mechanical voice carried no emotion, just processing information. "However, several instructors have requested permission to observe your preparation methods." She glanced up from her data displays. "Observe what, exactly?" "Your training regimen. The past 48 hours have been illuminating. While other cadets engage in conventional combat preparation, you appear to be studying historical battle footage and taking notes on a primitive data storage device. It's called research." "Indeed. What specifically are you researching?" "How everyone else fights." The simplicity of her answer seemed to confuse him more than any complex tactical explanation might have. His optical sensors cycled through several analysis modes before responding. "Standard doctrine emphasizes maximizing your own capabilities rather than analyzing opponent methodologies." "Maybe that's why it's standard." Krell's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. "Chief Instructor, she has been questioning the theoretical weaknesses of various species' combat approaches." "Has she now?" Mordak's attention sharpened. "And what conclusions have you reached, Cadet Epsilon 7? She saved her current research files and turned to face both instructors. "Everyone here fights exactly like their species is supposed to fight. Vorthak use overwhelming physical superiority. Kryn adapt their forms to counter specific threats. Helix optimize through technological integration. It's all very predictable." "Predictable," Mordak repeated the word as if tasting something unpleasant. "Refined, proven, efficient," Krell corrected. "Evolutionary success through specialized excellence." "Right, that's what makes it predictable." Neither instructor seemed to know how to respond to this observation. Evolutionary specialization was the foundation of interspecies combat doctrine, suggesting it constituted a weakness bordered on heresy. "Perhaps," Mordak finally said, "you could demonstrate these theories during tomorrow's preliminary trials." "That's the plan." After the instructors departed, Epsilon 7 returned to her research with renewed focus. She pulled up recordings of Academy training exercises from previous years, studying how each species' elite warriors approached various scenarios. The patterns were remarkably consistent. Each group defaulted to their evolutionary strengths regardless of tactical context. her datapad filled with observations. Vorthak always led with aggressive rushes designed to overwhelm opponents before they could establish defensive positions. Kryn invariably adapted their physical forms to counter specific threats, but required processing time between major configuration changes. Helix warriors optimized for maximum efficiency, which meant they followed logical decision trees that could be anticipated if you understood their programming parameters. Fascinating how apex predators could become so specialized that they forgot the value of unpredictability. Still researching, Epsilon? A familiar voice made her look up from her notes. Zara, another human cadet from a different training cohort, had approached her workstation. Unlike Epsilon 7, Zara had been assigned to support logistics rather than combat operations, a more realistic placement according to Academy standards. Something like that? How's your preparation going? I'm not in the gauntlet, Zara replied with obvious relief. Support personnel observe and provide tactical analysis for the instructors. Much safer than actually fighting these monsters. Probably smarter too. Definitely smarter. Have you seen what they do to each other during sparring sessions? Last week, Gorath accidentally removed one of Talon's limbs. They had to regenerate it in the medical bay. Epsilon 7 made another note on her datapad. Overconfidence in regenerative capabilities could create tactical openings if opponents expected their enemies to avoid permanent damage. Epsilon, can I ask you something? Sure. Why are you doing this? Everyone knows humans weren't meant for direct combat roles. We're supposed to be support staff, technical specialists, maybe strategic coordinators. This whole warrior thing is going to get you killed. She looked up from her research. Maybe. Or maybe everyone's wrong about what we're supposed to be. The Academy's best scientists analyzed human physiology. We're not built for this kind of fighting. No, Epsilon 7 agreed. We're not built like them. That doesn't mean we can't fight. How can you possibly compete against creatures that evolved specifically to be perfect killers? By not trying to be a perfect killer. Zara stared at her for a long moment. That makes no sense. It will tomorrow. As Zara departed, shaking her head in confusion, Epsilon 7 returned to her tactical analysis. 6 hours remained before the preliminary trials began. 6 hours to finalize her understanding of how the galaxy's apex predators approached combat. She pulled up one final recording, her own simulation performance from yesterday. Watching herself move through the holographic scenario, she could see what had confused the instructors. Her movements looked random, almost accidental. But if you understood the underlying pattern, the way she had observed and adapted elements from each species' approach while avoiding their limitations, it made perfect sense. The Academy had spent centuries perfecting warriors who fought like their evolutionary programming demanded. Tomorrow, they would discover what happened when someone fought like evolution had never heard of rules. Her datapad contained detailed notes on every major combat technique, every tactical weakness, every predictable response pattern she had observed. Not to copy them. She could never match their physical capabilities, but to dance around them. Tomorrow would be interesting. The Meridian Combat Academy's primary arena occupied the asteroid's entire central cavity, carved from solid rock and lined with energy barriers capable of containing small nuclear detonations. Spectator galleries rose in concentric circles around the combat floor, filled with instructors, support staff, and eliminated candidates from previous academy cycles. Everyone wanted to witness the legendary Gauntlet trials, where this year's elite would establish their final hierarchy through direct combat. In the preparation chambers beneath the arena, 64 cadets from across the galaxy checked their equipment one final time. The tournament bracket had been arranged according to Academy protocol. Preliminary matches would eliminate the obvious pretenders, followed by increasingly brutal confrontations, until only the apex remained. Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted biological configurations, Chief Instructor, Mordak's voice echoed through the arena's announcement system. Welcome to this cycle's gauntlet assessment. Combat will proceed through single elimination until we identify the top 8 candidates for immediate deployment to active war zones. Epsilon 7 stood in Preparation Chamber 19, surrounded by gear that looked inadequate compared to her opponent's equipment. No armor plating, no integrated weapons, no obvious technological enhancements, just standard-issue combat utilities, and what appeared to be cloth wrappings around her hands and feet. First bracket, Cadet Epsilon 7 versus Cadet Razor Edge 779. Her opponent materialized through the chamber's opposite entrance, a sharp tooth whose species had evolved on a world where everything tried to eat everything else with maximum violence. Razor Edge stood 3 meters tall, possessed natural weapons that could penetrate starship hulls, and had never lost a single combat encounter during academy training. The betting pools among the instructors had reached astronomical figures, with odds heavily favoring elimination within 30 seconds. Several academy officials had questioned the wisdom of allowing such an obvious mismatch to proceed, but regulations required all registered cadets to face preliminary assessment. Combat parameters, standard elimination protocols, Mordak announced, as both fighters entered the arena proper. Victory achieved through opponent surrender, incapacitation, or termination. Medical teams are standing by. The energy barriers activated with an audible hum. Spectators leaned forward in anticipation of what promised to be the shortest match in Academy history. Razor Edge circled his opponent with predatory confidence, natural weapons extending from his forearms like organic swords. His species had perfected killing techniques across millennia of constant warfare. Every movement demonstrated lethal precision honed by evolutionary necessity. "This will be quick," he rumbled through vocal cords designed for intimidation. "I shall make it painless out of respect for your courage in facing me." Epsilon 7 said nothing, but began moving in what could only be described as a gentle swaying motion, not preparation for attack or defense, more like warming up for exercise. "Begin," Mordak commanded. Razor Edge lunged forward with devastating speed, organic blades seeking vital points with surgical accuracy. The attack should have ended the match instantly. His natural weapons could penetrate any known armor. His reflexes outmatched most mechanical systems. His reach advantage made evasion impossible. Instead, his blades cut through empty air as Epsilon 7 flowed around his assault like water around stone. She didn't block, parry, or counterattack. She simply wasn't where his weapons expected her to be. "Interesting evasion technique," he admitted, adjusting his approach to account for unexpected mobility. "But you cannot run forever." His second assault came from multiple angles simultaneously, organic weapons creating a killing field that should have eliminated any escape routes. Razor Edge had used this technique to defeat Academy champions from 6 different species. No opponent had ever avoided the coordinated strike pattern. Epsilon 7 twisted through the attack matrix like smoke through a net, her movements defying logical prediction. Where conventional combat doctrine demanded meeting force with force, she offered no resistance whatsoever, redirecting lethal strikes into harmless trajectories through what appeared to be casual gestures. In the spectator galleries, conversations died as instructors struggled to categorize what they were witnessing. Her movement patterns suggest extensive training in gravitational flow dynamics, observed Commander Helix Prime, whose biomechanical analysis systems were working overtime. But humans lack the neural processing capability for such complex spatial calculations. "No," disagreed Instructor Vex. "She appears to be predicting his attack vectors through behavioral analysis. Each evasion occurs moments before the strike, not in reaction to it." "Impossible," rumbled General Bloodfang, whose Vorthak military experience spanned 3 major wars. Combat prescience requires evolutionary adaptations her species does not possess. Down in the arena, Razor Edge had escalated to maximum aggression. His attacks came in continuous waves, each strike pattern more complex than the last. Any normal opponent would have been overwhelmed within seconds. The sheer volume of lethal force should have made evasion impossible. Epsilon 7 continued her impossible dance, never quite where deadly intent expected to find her. But now her movements had acquired a different quality. Where initially she had seemed purely defensive, subtle changes in positioning began creating opportunities for counteraction. A strike aimed at her throat was redirected toward Razor Edge's own extended weapon arm. An overhead slash intended to split her skull instead contacted the arena floor with enough force to crack reinforced stone. His natural weapons, evolved for perfect killing efficiency, began working against each other through her careful orchestration. "She's using his attacks against him," whispered someone in the spectator gallery. More than that, Chief Instructor Mordak's voice carried amazement despite his mechanical vocal systems. "She's conducting his entire combat approach like a musical composition." Razor Edge finally paused his assault, confusion replacing predatory confidence. "What are you doing? This is not combat. This is some form of performance art." "Maybe they're the same thing," she replied, continuing her gentle swaying motion. His frustration erupted in a final, desperate charge, every natural weapon extended, every evolved advantage committed to a single, overwhelming assault. The attack contained enough destructive force to eliminate an entire squad of conventional warriors. Epsilon 7 stepped aside at the last possible moment, extending one cloth-wrapped hand to guide his momentum past her position. Razor Edge's own unstoppable force carried him directly into the arena's energy barrier at maximum velocity. The impact rendered him unconscious immediately. Silence filled the arena as medical teams rushed onto the combat floor. Razor Edge would recover completely, but his elimination was absolute and undeniable. "Winner, Cadet Epsilon 7, Mordak announced with obvious bewilderment. "Advancement to Bracket 16. She walked off the arena floor as casually as she had entered, while 63 remaining competitors tried to process what they had just witnessed. The Academy's most efficient organic killing machine had been defeated without his opponent throwing a single offensive strike. In Preparation Chamber 26, Gorath watched the tactical replay on his monitor system. The recorded footage showed every detail of the impossible victory, but provided no useful analysis for developing countermeasures. How does one prepare to fight an opponent who refuses to engage conventionally? He wondered aloud. You eliminate her before she can establish that evasive rhythm, suggested Nexus Prime from the adjacent chamber. Overwhelming initial force prevents her from implementing whatever technique she employed against Razor Edge. Assuming we understand her technique well enough to counter it, we must. The alternative implies that Academy combat doctrine contains fundamental flaws that have remained undetected for centuries. Across the preparation areas, similar conversations were taking place among cadets who had expected to face familiar forms of opposition. Instead, they now confronted the disturbing possibility that everything they understood about combat superiority might be incomplete. Epsilon 7 returned to her preparation chamber and made additional notes on her primitive data pad. The first preliminary match had provided valuable information about how her approach would function against different combat philosophies. Razor Edge fought exactly like his evolutionary programming demanded: direct, aggressive, overwhelming force applied with maximum efficiency, which made him predictable. The second bracket was already beginning in the arena above. Through the chamber's audio feed, she could hear another conventional elimination match between apex predators who fought according to their species' established doctrines. Efficient, proven, evolutionary success through specialized excellence. Predictable. Her datapad contained tactical profiles for every remaining opponent, compiled through months of careful observation. Each species' combat approach followed recognizable patterns based on their evolutionary advantages. They had become so specialized that they had forgotten the tactical value of being unpredictable. Tomorrow's matches would test whether her theory could be applied systematically, or whether Razor Edge's defeat represented a single statistical anomaly in an otherwise proven system. 63 opponents remained. Each one was an apex predator evolved for perfect killing efficiency. Each one fought according to millions of years of specialized evolutionary programming. Each one was about to discover what happened when evolution encountered something it had never seen before. The final elimination rounds had winnowed 64 competitors down to 8, and the Academy's confidence in natural order was cracking like overstressed armor plating. Through systematic application of her impossible methodology, Epsilon 7 had dismantled opponents whose species had dominated galactic warfare for millennia. Each victory defied increasingly desperate attempts by Academy officials to explain her success through conventional tactical analysis. This constitutes a fundamental challenge to established military doctrine, declared Supreme Commander Thane during an emergency instructor conference. His apex hybrid physiology combined advantages from multiple species, making him the Academy's ultimate authority on combat effectiveness. Either our assessment protocols have failed catastrophically, or we are witnessing capabilities that transcend current understanding of warfare. Chief Instructor Mordak projected tactical recordings from the tournament's progression. Analysis of her performance indicates systematic exploitation of opponent behavioral patterns. However, the computational requirements for such real-time adaptation should exceed human neural capacity by several orders of magnitude. Unless, suggested Instructor Vex thoughtfully, the computational approach itself represents flawed assumptions about how combat intelligence functions. The remaining semifinals would determine which 3 competitors would face Epsilon 7 in the final rounds. Academy protocol demanded that she eventually encounter opponents whose capabilities could not be predicted or redirected through her mysterious techniques. In the arena's central combat zone, Shard materialized into his optimal configuration: crystalline matrices arranged for maximum offensive and defensive capability. His opponent, Nexus Prime, had integrated additional weapon systems specifically to counter unconventional tactics. Both warriors represented evolutionary perfection through different methodologies. "Begin," Mordak announced. The match lasted 14 seconds. Shard's adaptive crystal configurations proved superior to Nexus Prime's technological integration through straightforward application of evolved advantages over mechanical enhancements. Victory through established doctrine, exactly as Academy simulations had predicted. Epsilon 7 watched from her preparation chamber, adding final observations to her data collection. Shard fought with beautiful efficiency, reshaping his physical form to counter each specific threat while maintaining perfect structural integrity. His species had achieved evolutionary perfection through infinite adaptability within combat scenarios, which made him predictable in a completely different way than his predecessors. The second semifinal matched Goreth against a direwolf, whose pack-hunting instincts had been enhanced through genetic optimization. The Vorthak's overwhelming physical superiority crushed his opponent's coordinated assault tactics within 23 seconds. Another confirmation that individual apex predators outmatched group-oriented approaches in direct combat situations. Final bracket participants confirmed, Mordak announced to the arena. Championship matches will proceed with modified protocols to ensure adequate assessment of combat capabilities. Translation: They were terrified that their most elite warriors might be systematically dismantled by techniques they couldn't understand or counter. Epsilon 7's first final match occurred against Goreth, whose Vorthak physiology represented the absolute pinnacle of evolved combat supremacy. His exoskeleton could deflect starship weaponry. His reflexes operated in microsecond time frames, and his natural weapons could penetrate any known defensive system. Academy records showed he had never been defeated in direct combat by any opponent from any species. "I have studied recordings of your previous matches," he announced as they entered the arena. "Your technique appears to involve redirecting opponent momentum through precise timing and positioning. However, my species possesses sufficient mass and structural integrity to render such methods ineffective." "We'll see," she replied, beginning her familiar swaying preparation. "Indeed we shall. I will not repeat the errors of previous opponents who allowed you to establish whatever rhythm enables your evasive capabilities. This match will end immediately." Gorith's opening assault combined maximum aggression with tactical intelligence, creating attack patterns designed specifically to eliminate evasion opportunities. His massive frame moved with impossible speed, natural weapons creating overlapping fields of destruction that should have made survival impossible for any opponent lacking comparable physical advantages. Epsilon 7 flowed around his offensive like mist through a hurricane, but this time her movements carried different intentions. Instead of purely defensive evasion, she began implementing techniques that transformed his devastating attacks into precisely choreographed sequences. Each strike he threw became part of a larger pattern that she was conducting like a symphony of violence. His exoskeleton's structural integrity, his microsecond reflexes, his unstoppable momentum, all of his evolved advantages became instruments in a composition that culminated with Gorith's own natural weapons somehow entangled with each other in physically impossible configurations. He toppled like a fallen monument, immobilized by his own evolutionary perfections. "How?" he demanded from his position on the arena floor. "You're all so good at what you do," she explained, while medical teams prepared extraction equipment capable of lifting his massive frame. "But being perfect at one thing makes you vulnerable to someone who's adequate at everything." The final championship match would be against Shard, whose infinite adaptability theoretically provided the perfect counter to her systematic approach. If her technique involved exploiting predictable behavioral patterns, facing an opponent capable of continuous adaptation should neutralize her advantage completely. "Fascinating," Shard's crystalline voice resonated through the arena as they assumed combat positions. "I have analyzed tactical recordings of your victories and concluded that conventional combat doctrine cannot explain your methodology. Therefore, I shall abandon all established approaches and implement purely random attack sequences." "Random?" she asked, with what might have been amusement. "Precisely. If your technique requires predicting opponent behavior patterns, encountering truly chaotic combat should prove insurmountable." Shard began reshaping his crystalline matrix into configurations that defied logical purpose, weapons that served no tactical advantage, defensive forms that protected against non-existent threats, movement patterns that followed no strategic objective. Pure chaos implemented through perfect adaptive control. It was, by any reasonable standard, completely unpredictable. Epsilon 7 watched his chaotic display with obvious fascination. For the first time during the entire tournament, she seemed genuinely engaged with an opponent's approach rather than simply responding to it. "Begin," Mordak announced. What followed transcended conventional definitions of combat. Shard's random configurations created constantly shifting tactical scenarios that no predetermined strategy could address. His crystalline form flowed between attack modes faster than most opponents could process, presenting threats that changed faster than conscious thought could track. Epsilon 7 responded by abandoning her own established patterns. Instead of flowing around his attacks, she began improvising responses that matched his chaos with equally spontaneous adaptations. The match became a conversation conducted through violence, each combatant responding to the other's innovations with creative variations that pushed beyond established limits. For 11 minutes, they fought like evolution was still learning how combat should work. Finally, Shard's crystalline matrix locked into a configuration that combined elements from every major combat doctrine in known space. He had achieved perfect synthesis, the ultimate adaptive form that theoretically could counter any possible attack. Epsilon 7 looked at his perfect configuration and smiled. Then she did something that made every instructor in the spectator gallery question their understanding of physical reality. Instead of attacking his crystalline perfection, she began moving in patterns that caused Shard to adapt further. Each subtle shift in her positioning triggered automatic responses from his adaptive systems, which triggered counter-adaptations, which triggered secondary responses, until his infinite adaptability became an endless recursive loop. Shard's crystalline matrix began cycling through configurations faster and faster, adapting to adaptations of adaptations until his perfect system overloaded trying to achieve optimal responses to constantly shifting scenarios. He collapsed into crystalline fragments, his evolutionary perfection undone by its own infinite capability. Winner of this cycle's gauntlet assessment, Cadet Epsilon 7. Silence filled the arena. The Academy's most elite specimens had been systematically defeated by techniques that defied every established principle of combat doctrine. As medical teams attended to Shard's crystalline reconstruction, Epsilon 7 walked toward the exit with her primitive datapad tucked away. Behind her, instructors and spectators struggled to process the implications of what they had witnessed. Supreme Commander, Chief Instructor Mordak approached the Academy's highest authority. We require immediate revision of combat assessment protocols. Current methodology appears inadequate for evaluating unconventional approaches to warfare. Thane's hybrid physiology allowed him to process multiple analytical frameworks simultaneously, but even his enhanced cognitive capabilities found no ready explanation for the tournament results. Perhaps our understanding of combat superiority requires fundamental reconsideration. In the preparation chambers below, eliminated competitors compared notes on their defeats while trying to identify common factors that might explain their systematic failures. She never fought us, Goreth concluded after reviewing tactical recordings. She fought our expectations of how we should fight. More than that, added the recovered Razor Edge, she fought our evolution itself. Above them in the arena, Academy officials debated whether Epsilon 7's victories represented revolutionary combat innovation or dangerous deviation from proven military doctrine. Some argued for immediate deployment to active war zones where her capabilities could be tested against real opponents. Others insisted on comprehensive study to understand her methods before risking valuable personnel on unproven techniques. None of them noticed the quiet human walking through the Academy's corridors, adding final observations to her handwritten notes. The datapad contained systematic analysis of how every major species approached combat, their strengths, their limitations, their evolutionary blind spots. But more importantly, it contained proof that apex predators could become so specialized in their perfection that they forgot the most fundamental principle of warfare. Adaptability trumped optimization when opponents refused to fight according to established rules. The Academy had spent centuries perfecting warriors who fought like their evolutionary programming demanded. Today, they had discovered what happened when someone fought like evolution was still taking suggestions. Tomorrow, the galaxy's military establishments would begin questioning whether their apex predators were actually perfect killers or perfectly predictable ones.